Hello, this is Dean Takahashi from GamesBeat, and we're going to talk next about the realities of crossplay and managing live services with Jesse Houston, CEO of Phoenix Labs, which is the maker of the free-to-play game Dauntless. This is a multiplayer game where a trio of players gets together to slay monsters. And our title suggests that there's some fantasies and some realities about crossplay here. So Jesse, welcome, and tell us about the inception of Dauntless and how you got it to market.
Thanks for having me, Dean. Dauntless, when we initially got started, we really sat down as a studio, and when we were like super small, like 6 folks, knowing that we wanted to make a game that was ultimately about, hanging out with your friends, getting together, and achieving bigger goals than you otherwise would be able to. And, we really knew from the get-go, we also wanted to make sure that any player could play with their friends, regardless of kind of where they were, what platforms they had. And we started in 2014, and, back in those days, the concept of, cross-platform play was kind of a pipe dream. But really early on, I think as early as 2015, we had Xbox and PC playing together. There's some, for development reasons, that's actually a relatively much easier thing to do. Excuse me, not compliant in the least or anything like that. Just connecting, working, the controllers work together, that kind of stuff. And as we continued to develop more and more, we focused initially on PC. And, as we started ramping up into the console versions, we really wanted to achieve that vision of kind of wherever you are, whoever you want to play with, and on whatever platform you want to play on, you can play Dauntless with your friends. And so, back in, call it early 2018, when we really started the kind of the process of moving to consoles in earnest, we started reaching out to Microsoft and Sony and Epic and working with them to figure out, how do we best achieve that vision? And, initially it was a bit of a hard road. Like, there's a lot of, we were a super small company at the time. I think we were about 50 folks. And, the idea of an independent studio properly managing the challenges that come with a crossplay title was really scary. And so, we had to spend a lot of time talking through with these folks about the ideas of like, hey, here's how that would work. Here's the kind of the overall user experience. Here's how we would manage your trademarks and your IP and your experiences and your players and make them feel like everything's a really premium experience.
I mean, it seems like the PC was a good starting point for you guys, right? I mean, if maybe you had chosen something else, you might have not had many options. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I think one of the things that helped us along the way was we've been developing very much in the open for a long, long time, right? Once, our first public playtest was right after announcing the game in 2016. And, we started with a really small core group of folks, and we kept, adding more and more people. And then in 2017, we started like an open beta, or closed beta rather. And, I think it helped our overall, like our own confidence in our development methodologies and our ability to keep a really premium experience, knowing that we had been running a live service nonstop for so many years. And so the transition from, our own self-hosted platform over into, onto like Epic's off platform, as well as the other consoles, was more of an iteration rather than just simply, try to figure out how to publish a game for the first time, which was really, really helpful. Even though it was technically like call it a coming out event or a launch, we had a ton of experience at that point. We had already had millions of players come through the game. And so there was a lot of knowledge already built up on kind of how we had to keep everything going and how it all had to work. And so, there's the problems that moving into the consoles and a much larger audience created were the only ones that we really had to focus on. We didn't have to also worry about, how do you deploy a patch and that kind of stuff.
So, I mean, we're talking about this today because it was successful, right? So how well is it doing today in terms of numbers of people? And then how many platforms did you get to here?
Yeah, so when we launched the game, we had about 3 million players that played the game, and as of about January, we've had over 20 million players play. And that growth we're in the strongest period of the game since. And we initially launched on Xbox, PS4, and PC through the Epic Game Store, and then in December we also added Switch, which has been awesome. The Switch community has just been a phenomenal addition, and we've got our aspirations on a number of other platforms. As we kind of move forward, we've talked a little bit about mobile. That'll be in the future, and there's some other stuff obviously we've got cooking up, and the growth though has been excellent. Like, one of the really nice things about working on a live service game is, the game that you play today is always the best version of it, and it's always getting quite a bit better. Since May of last year, we've patched 81 times, and every single time there's like an incremental improvement to the overall quality of the game. We've redone the opening of the game a couple of times. The end game got redone in December. We've added a bunch of weapons, tons of new monsters. Like, there's just quite a bit more stuff in the game, and you can really feel it as a player. And so, as we've kind of come up the adoption curve, as new players come in, they're really getting a pretty awesome experience. And as one of the other cool things is, as players come back, they're experiencing almost a different video game, which is super cool to see. Players who are like, "Oh, I played in 2017, and I can't believe how far it's come." It's like awesome.
Yeah. So take us back a little bit on the crossplay decision. I think the fantasy here is that crossplay is a checkbox now, right? Just check it off and we're done. But it wasn't that way when you guys were deciding this, I guess.
Absolutely. I mean, there was some stuff that was easier than others. So Dauntless is made in Unreal, and that by itself makes it a lot easier, right? Like, the Fortnite team has done a ton of work to kind of get a lot of that stuff working more easily, and so we got to leverage a bunch of that because Epic is awesome about putting stuff back into the vanilla version of Unreal.
But you weren't so many months behind them, and
no, that's
they were
true.
doing this, right?
Yeah, so they went full crossplay in September of last year, and or September of the year prior, and we were the following May. So call it 6-7 months behind them.
Okay.
That said, a lot of these things take a lot of time. Epic was a great partner. I spent a bunch of time talking with Tim and his team about kind of our vision, and they were incredibly helpful with both advice and anytime that we would phone them and say, hey, like, we're really stuck on X, they would do, okay, here's how we figured that out. Like, one of the things I really like about working with them is there's a real openness and transparency and an interest for all developers to win. They're not they live in a world of plenty, not a world of scarcity. And I think that's a really cool mindset to have. And
it sounds a bit like they use the power of Fortnite to force this door open, and then they're holding it open for people like you to sneak in.
I don't know. I don't know if I would define it as that they tried to use Fortnite as leverage over any of the first parties, but they definitely wanted to spread the knowledge and not hoard it. In my discussions with him, it always came through just how interested he is in the better player. Like, he shares my belief, which the crossplay is the better experience. Like, if you and I can play together, it's always a better experience as a player than not being able to for arbitrary reasons. Those reasons are really important, but they are like having a great experience feels good. Like, if two consoles playing together causes the game to crash, that's not good for anybody, right? So there's a lot of value in why it's difficult for developers to do crossplay, conceptually. But it is a much better overall experience. We find, for example, that players who play in a crossplay environment with their friends who are off platform play more, report that they have more fun than kind of a normal solo player, for example. So just the act of doing that and there's a ton of anecdotal evidence on this as well, where, I regularly get notes and emails from fans who are like, I've never been able to play with my friend Joe down the street because he's got an Xbox and I've got a PS4, and this is the best ever, yada, yada, yada. And those kind of things are really proof in the pudding for me. And, coming back to your statement around like kind of using Fortnite, I think it was more like thinking of Fortnite more as an icebreaker rather than, a wedge in the door. There's just a lot of things that you don't know until you've gone down that path of how hard.
Yeah, there were a lot of things that could have tripped you here, not knowing about, say, the way Sony does things or the way Nintendo does things, right?
Absolutely, right.
What's allowed, what's not allowed.
Yeah, even just stuff like, how to expose purchases to players or how to expose trademarks to players. I mean, these are, for obvious reasons, if I'm, a platform holder, I'm not exactly super keen on the idea of my trademark or other companies' trademarks being used on my platform, right? So, you could get into it could feel like advertising or some other thing, and I always want my platform to feel premium and justifiably, like each of these platforms has really interesting premium experiences. The ability for it to take Dauntless off of the cradle and walk around with it on a Switch is an incredible game changer for a lot of players, and at the same time, the higher resolutions and better FPS that the PS4 Pro produces are obviously better. So you have to have the same game, but you also have to make sure that it feels like a premium experience to both. And both groups need to feel like
you can't have a stepchild here.
Exactly, right.
Yeah.
And that's really an important part of kind of, making sure that those things work. And I think if you look at the games that have done crossplay successfully, Fortnite, Rocket League, that kind of stuff, it does feel very much like no matter where you sit down, it's the best experience. And we spent a lot of time internally with our UX team and our platform teams, looking at, how do we make sure that everything feels great on everywhere rather than, it's this cruddy experience over here. And it's tough, right?
Yeah. It feels like the design matters here too. Like a 3-player co-op game online sounds a little easier to synchronize than something else, FPS games or whatever.
I think we've got it lucky in, the way that we structured the game was always meant to have connectivity be, relatively straightforward. We knew that we were going to be a small team, and so we couldn't go and try and do, something crazy like a 10,000 person open world shared experience. So a more hub and spoke style game was a better option for us. And even then, there's still a bunch of complexity there. Like our hub city, I feel my poor team hears constantly like, I just want more players and more life in our hub city. And they're like, hey, how about we make it performant? And so, there's still this kind of push pull because, the hub city right now has, depending on, whether or not I'm more winning the argument or our graphics guys are winning the argument, 24 to 36 players on a given day. And I want it to go further than that, and we're still trying to figure out how to do that. But that, those kind of things are making it a lot harder, and adding more and more players obviously makes it a lot harder. I can't imagine the challenge of getting 100 players on screen in like the Fortnite case versus 24 or 4, depending on the the island context or the city context for us. There was, to your point, though, a lot of forethought that we had put in, knowing that we wanted to be able to move quickly, but that also then that agility allowed us to then, integrate the multiple platforms really well.
The fact that you were allowed to make this happen sounds like the platform holders came around to believe that this was good for everybody, I guess. And they've been sold on the idea, I guess.
Yeah, I would offer again, the big thing there was about, I don't think anybody, for example, on any of the platform thinks that it's inherently a bad idea versus, there are just so many landmines throughout there are, and most of the folks watching this will have probably been through a certification process before. Each of the platforms has different rules, and some of those rules are potentially conflicting, and they know this, right? But they both have to pass at the same time, right? Because both builds have to be able to talk to each other, so they must be functionally identical builds. And so, being able to learn how to navigate that is a trust building exercise. In our case, we spent months in pre-cert. We were pre-certing a lot of times. I can't remember the specific number, but it was, we made sure we spent a lot of time with the first parties going, okay, cool. Like, here's how we're doing it. Here's our plans. Here's like, for like the social menus are a really good example of this, where like, how do you show somebody who's playing Dauntless, but not on platform? How do you do that in the right way? Like, we have these little funny icons that kind of hint at what platform it is, but it's obscure enough that it doesn't. And we had to show wires and show what the imagery was and get a lot of pre-approval. And a lot of these groups are just not used to pre-approval. Like, they're kind of used to being treated as almost an adversarial relationship by developers, where like you have to go through cert and therefore blah. And so a lot of the initial conversations, especially with the certification groups, was just building relationships with them, going like, no, we want what you want. Let us prove that. And that's been incredibly helpful. So
we're starting to get to more generalized tips, I think, that can be useful for people who are sort of following in your footsteps here. What are some tips that maybe everybody could benefit from here?
Don't expect that you'll get approval. And I think there's been a number of teams that have announced and then launched games, announced that they would have crossplay and then launch games without. So there's don't expect approval. Like, everybody still requires custom approval. And I think the other one that I would offer is expect that it will take a very, very long time with a lot of iteration and expense on your part. Probably the single largest call it the single largest lift we've done as an organization was go from 3 independent platforms at the time, the PC, Xbox, PS4, that worked, even though they were code identical and could connect, to crossplay compliant. Took maybe half the team for almost a year to really get it into like a place where everybody would be really happy. And then maintaining it is also really an important and difficult thing to do. Like, it's not like we just get a free pass. Like, we have to prove every single time, like, that we haven't broken any rules, that and a lot of that is, again, building that trust that we're testing very very heavily. And then expect that you're going to have to build deep relationships with the platform holders. It's not as straightforward as shipping normally, which is already an incredibly complicated process. Putting a game onto an Xbox is not is a feat all by itself, right? Like, it's still a premium experience. It's still a premium problem set that devs struggle with, right? Like, it's hard to get a game through cert. It is way harder to get a game through crossplay cert.
So you guys are trying to get this to happen on mobile as well. First, why include mobile? Like, it's interesting to have mobile players try to square off against PC players, I guess. And in other games, I think the co-op game here like this, it's a little different, I guess. But I think it's an interesting sort of part of the choices here that you may make, and then how soon is the mobile actually happening too?
Yeah, I think the way to think about it is, I think I mentioned it earlier, like, the goal for Dauntless has always been about, wherever you are, whoever you want to play with, or whatever platform you want to play on, you should be able to play Dauntless with your friends. And, if I really abstract that problem into that space, let's say I come over to your house and you're like, man, I just got this new set of armor, and, let's go do up a couple of hunts. And if, not having 2 TVs shouldn't block that. And so as we, continue to refine and build the game, the ability to, pick up your phone and have a great experience with your friends, I think is super optimal. And I also think, like, as gamers, as gaming matures, we're seeing a lot more folks who mobile is their primary platform that they play games on. It's not unusual these days for me to go to a restaurant and see 4 folks sitting at a table playing games. And, if those four folks could be sitting at a table playing a Dauntless experience together, I think that's a really great moment. I really believe in cooperative gaming. I think co-op gaming is the most fun. It also is way easier to do a mobile and PC playing together. Like the control fidelity doesn't create as many problems as in a PvP environment would, right? Like, and in our case, like the game feels really good on mobile. We've had it running for a while on high-end devices and whatnot. There's still a lot of UX work to get done. Like, we still have a very console PC focused menu experience and that kind of stuff. As we think kind of in the future, the idea of being able to reach players wherever they are, I think is really super, super cool. It's still the most asked for thing, especially from folks who are a little bit on the under end of the spectrum in our audience. They want to go to school and be able to get a hunt or two in over.
And you guys were acquired by Garita during this time, I guess, yeah. And they have a lot of mobile expertise as well, I guess. Is that helping you?
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of our sister studio in Shanghai is the one that makes Free Fire, which last year was the most downloaded mobile game, which is awesome. And they bring a ton of really interesting perspective, not just on mobile, but also on markets where I have not had a lot of personal history, like LATAM and Brazil and Southeast Asia. They're incredibly knowledgeable and really in tune with what the audience is looking for. And they've just really opened the book to us to ask questions in a really nice way. Like, they're super not pushy about an agenda or anything like that. It's really just, hey, how can we help? What do you need? They believe in Dauntless as a game. They believe in Phoenix Labs as a company, and we're functionally independent within the larger organization. But I have a guy who I can just kind of go, hey, who's the best person for me to talk to about Brazilian game servers? And they will like, oh yeah, here's what we've learned and those kind of things, and here's why this works and doesn't work. I got a 500-page research analysis on a specific question that I had asked recently. It was like the most in-depth set of research that I've ever seen in my entire career. And it was, after in the middle of a meeting, I asked the Thai country manager kind of this random question. He's like, let me spin up some research for you on that. And like 2 weeks later, I get this like turbo report where, like a PhD level thesis on what I was asking about. Those kind of things have just been great. By
the way, you've got this distributed workforce now that you're working with all these people with from home, I guess, right?
Yeah.
If you looked back, would the crossplay have been possible if you're in this situation?
I think so. So one of the things we actually have been relatively distributed for a long time. So our main office is in Vancouver, but we have a studio in San Francisco and one in Seattle, and we've also got quite a few folks who work remotely all the time. So the ship has been call it ice broken by that group early. Like, there have definitely been some challenges, like builds, for example. Like, we leverage the heck out of distributed build technology, and a lot of that kind of just goes away when you've got one computer in your home. And so we've had to spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to get that kind of stuff online again. But from an overall kind of communication patterns and stuff like that, the team internally is radiating that we've actually gotten better at communication because we're being more thoughtful about it now, like because we have to go through Zoom, and we're being a lot more thoughtful about making sure that we don't fill up a full hour meeting so that people can do things like go to the washroom and those kind of things. And that thoughtfulness, I think, has actually made us a better company overall. So to answer your question, yeah, I absolutely do think we could totally have done crossplay. It still would have been really hard. But the team has already just totally come together in this new environment and really is just kicking ass and taking names.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So I guess are there any downsides to crossplay as well that developers should be aware
sure.
about?
Yeah. I mean, if you think about like a normal patch, for example, if your PC and your Xbox patch get through, I guess there's no PC certification, but like if your Xbox and Switch builds pass through certification, but your PS4 doesn't, it's not a big deal, right? Like you just re-up PS4, maybe it comes out a day or two later, right? And you can kind of over time you can smooth out that problem with the audience, and it's not the end of the world. In the crossplay world, that can't happen. Every build has to go through every group at the same time. And so you're functionally limited to kind of whoever is the last person to give you approval, and making sure that you get approval across all platforms. It creates an accounting nightmare. The idea of a player could play on one console, like in gap-based accounting, there's this concept of revenue recognition, which every live service game hates. And one of the challenges that it creates, though, is like you could buy something on platform A and then use it on platform B and then finish using it on platform C. So who gets the revenue and how do you recognize it starts to become really problematic. And there's just a ton of these kind of things that crop up over time that we've been lucky that a number of us have run live services before. I kind of could smell or could sense some smoke over there. Yeah. But if you're trying to do a live service game for the first time and then also trying to do crossplay for the first time, there's a multiplicative set of problems that end up really kind of slowing you down.
So we're getting to our last couple of minutes here. I'm kind of wondering where you want crossplay to go, or where you want, maybe if that's not as sort of formed as an answer for you, where do you want Dauntless to go?
Yeah, I think so. Crossplay is an interesting one. I think crossplay is the current. What will I think in the next 18 to 24 months, the industry, crossplay is going to be table stakes for the industry. I think, we can see it with Call of Duty, and, a lot of the big players are starting to really see the value of it. Platforms are starting to open up a lot more. I think we're going to see a lot more folks shipping games that have crossplay. I don't think it's the final form of where truly social play goes. I think because, crossplay at its heart is you get to play the same game on every platform. But I think that there's this kind of next thing that I do a lot of thinking about, which is this idea that crossplay really should or rather playing together should be devices shouldn't be part of the equation of how we play together. And so whether I'm playing on mobile or Xbox, I should be able to play with my friends in a Dauntless experience, if you will, but not necessarily the same game. I don't know if this will ever manifest in Dauntless, but as I continue to think about it, this kind of platform agnostic experience, I think, is the next run of it. Not necessarily just the same experience, agnostic of platform. I know that's kind of nuanced, but I think that's kind of as we see the kind of social cooperative play trend, that's kind of where I see it going. And then for Dauntless, it's we're continuing to invest a ton in the game right now. We are right in the middle of kind of a big, huge lift, both for our summer release, and then we've got a lot of stuff planned for kind of our later year stuff as well.
So we're running out of our time, right. I guess, but yeah, I think maybe you'll get to that world where you can just check the box and.
Yeah, one can hope. I think once the Epics and the Unities of the world kind of get a few more runs of many more games, they'll be able to kind of move some of that technology upstream, and it'll get a lot easier for developers.
All right. Well, that's Jesse Houston of Phoenix Labs. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dean. Have a great rest of your day.
All right.